art students. In this video, I'm going to go through the sustained investigation of a perfect drawing portfolio. If you have not watched the other two videos first, I would recommend going back and watching those. That is where I explain a little bit more detail about the portfolio, just kind of as a review for you. But this is an example from 2019 that received a score of 6. And so I want to show this to you kind of as a benchmark so that you can see what a perfect AP art portfolio looks like. So let's get into this student's work. We're going to start with her concentration statement. So what she wrote about her work that the evaluators read is, the central idea of my concentration is something unusual, breaking routine. I wanted to show groups of people going through the expected and running through their usual habits, all while being totally ignorant of the exciting and electric events happening right in front of their faces. In order to emphasize this, I made the only recurring element a single girl, captivated by what no one else seems to notice. I particularly wanted to explore my concentration through color. So throughout my concentration, I focused on using blue and pink. Throughout the pieces, I have blue act as the routine and the pink act as the unusual thing. As a small detail, the girl's body remains blue while a pink light is reflected on her face, indicating that she is able to observe the absurd around her. Meanwhile, the other character's eyes remain closed or staring straight ahead. Another decision I made with my concentration was to have no true linear story. I wanted each piece to be able to represent its own unusual thing, unique from the other unusual things, and able to represent its own independent story even though the girl directly connects each piece. I was influenced by the idea of potential in Chris Van Allsburg's The Mysteries of Harris Burdick. So there's her reference to a famous artist. And I thought an idea as simple as something unusual breaking routine could demonstrate that potential. I liked the idea that any viewer could take one or a few or even all the pieces and approach it differently. I want the viewer to try to come up with their own ideas to what it means and tell their own story. So let me make a couple comments here. First of all, I mentioned this earlier, but in case you missed it, if you want to do narrative, I recommend that you do a non-linear story like the student did. That way we can put your pieces in an order that is most advantageous to you. So sometimes either toward the end, because you rush a little bit, your pieces are not as good, or sometimes there's a piece in the middle that just doesn't come out good. Maybe you're having a bad week, or that, that idea just doesn't come through the way you want it to. So if you do a non-linear story where each piece kind of contains its own story, you can still do narrative, but we can arrange your pieces in a way that shows growth from the weakest to the strongest. So you are going to naturally grow over the course of the semester, but if you do a story that's very linear, where like we have to say like this is the first part of the story and this is the middle part of the story and this is the end of the story, and you have to have all those pieces, then you can't make any mistakes and you have to make sure that you're getting better in each piece, and that's a lot of pressure. So if you will do non-linear stories instead, you can still do narrative, but then we can arrange your pieces at the end in a way that shows growth without the pressure of every single piece being perfect and progressing perfectly. And then the other thing I wanted to comment on here is that Chris Van Allsburg's Mysteries of Harris Burdick, if you were interested in narrative or illustration, definitely look up that artist and this work of his. It is amazing. And Chris Van Allsburg is also the illustrator who did the Polar Express. And so you're probably already familiar with his work, but this book of his right here, I don't know if you would call it a book, but wonderful pieces. I used it a lot when I taught elementary art. All right, so let's get into these pieces right here. So you'll see a range of sizes, which is good. So not every single piece is exactly the same size. So don't feel like you have to make all your pieces exactly the same in size. Some can be larger, some can be smaller. Do what is most effective for your time management and also most effective for the idea that you're trying to convey. This piece right here is one of their early pieces, and they used acrylic paint, Sharpie, colored pencil, gel pen, and Photoshop. And remember my theory I talked about in the last video, where I think this student probably got a computer or tablet halfway through the school year. Imagine, you know, they don't have semesters, they have the whole year. And then for Christmas, the student gets a computer or gets Photoshop on their computer or gets a tablet. And so that theory that I have, because about halfway through they start using Photoshop for almost all their pieces, that would also tell me that if this is one of their earlier pieces, that they probably reworked this piece some later to make it fit into their portfolio. So this piece looks like maybe it was kind of like the beginnings of this idea, and then they actually went back and reworked it in Photoshop to make it fit with the other pieces. So know that that kind of thing is something that you can use to your advantage this year. All of that is showing that you can do those higher order thinking, and you can make good decisions as an artist. So don't feel like that's cheating. That is absolutely okay to do. All right, now from here on out, it gets a little more clear and consistent in style, and it definitely fits with what the student was saying their goal was throughout their portfolio. This is colored pencil and acrylic paint. You have watercolor, colored pencil, and ballpoint pen and Photoshop. Here you have watercolor paint, Sharpie, acrylic paint, colored pencil, and gel pen. So like I was saying, a lot more traditional media, and later on there will be more digital manipulation and less traditional media. Then you have image 5, watercolor, colored pencil, and acrylic. Watercolor, colored pencil, gel pen, and Photoshop. And I'm starting to see some of that cell shading here. So they were playing with digital painting. Then you have acrylic paint, colored pencil, ballpoint, and pen. Colored pencil, acrylic paint, and then you have a Photoshop piece. So every piece before this point, remember there's going to be 12, it was more traditional drawing media, and then from this point on they're going to use more Photoshop. Now a couple pieces before do have some Photoshop. So did the student rearrange their images to show us progression? And so those pieces that are kind of like thrown in the middle with Photoshop, were they actually like right before this piece in their timeline, their actual timeline? Or did they go back and rework those pieces in Photoshop to make them fit into their portfolio better? We can't really know that without asking the student, and why would the student reveal that to us? But just keep that in mind to know that that is something that you can do to help your portfolio score better. So making those kind of decisions is great. All right, so here is some of their early Photoshop work, and it is still really good, but it could grow quite a bit. So let's see how much they grow over the next several pieces. All right, here's another Photoshop piece. We've got some issues with the figure-ground relationship here, but for the most part, it is technically well executed. Here is a beautiful Photoshop illustration. Excellent. Just the use of color, the use of figure-ground relationship, the shading and rendering of form, but then also mixing that with more graphic representations. Just excellently done. This is professional level right here. Then you have image 12, and this is done in Photoshop, but it is so well done. So definitely I would say above professional level. And I'm also seeing that the student is capable of working in several different Photoshop styles. So not only are they great with traditional drawing media, but they are also great with Photoshop, and they progressed very quickly. Let's get into the score rationale for the student. So the topic, unusual things that break routine, is unmistakably and coherently integrated with the work. This evocative, engaging theme is sustained through all the works in the portfolio. The scenes depict groups of people going through the expected and running through their usual habits, all while being totally ignorant of the exciting and electric events happening right around in front of their faces. The one exception is a girl with pink light reflecting on her face, seen in each image, indicating that she is able to observe the absurd around her. Her presence brings consistency to the work. Although the works are independent narratives, there are clearly unifying tactics in the stories. In some of the images, the fantastical shifts introduce animals. For example, in image 2, a large bullish creature is purchasing the typical eggs and milk at an average neighborhood grocery store. In image 3, the shadow of a jogger becomes a roaring lion, and in image 6, a wolf sits in the chair of a hairdresser. Another thing that I would like to comment on here is a lot of times in your artistic development, you get to this time in your psychological development too, where you want to make art about yourself. But this is a very sophisticated way to do that. So this student probably is incorporating a little bit of a self-portrait in here, and that she includes this girl who can see the fantastical around her, but she's done it in such a beautiful way that it is very relatable. So even if I am not a young girl that looks exactly like her, I can relate to these images and I can kind of put myself in that role as the person who can see everything around them. So think about ways that you can kind of transcend your own experiences, like make work that is personal to you and that is real, but also how can you transcend that and make it where other people are going to relate to your work as well. All right, then you have the next part of this score rationale, which says image 4 is a clear example of work that demonstrates original thinking. The girl on the right, emphasized by the pink face, is the only figure with a readable expression facing the viewer. The direction of her gaze and the expression on her face suggests concern directed at what is occurring on the table at the bottom of the composition. The work takes risk with the multiple perspectives present. The background uses classical one-point perspective, while the table drawing our attention is presented from an aerial perspective, confronting the viewer. The use of space, perspective, and contrasting values and warm colors create interest about this gathering of figures drinking coffee. So taking the mundane and making it exciting. The work conveys a sense of successful transformation and growth. Compositional use of the picture plane and perspective evolve throughout the work. The delivery of the intended ideas becomes more mature and more open to interpretation. For example, the use of perspective in images 3 and 6 is not as strong, and the links between the human figures and the animal imagery are mostly literal. In images 5, 7, and 8, on the other hand, exemplify use of compositional space while leaving room for interpretation of the more sophisticated analogies presented. So even though everything in the student's portfolio is at a professional artist level, there are always a couple areas for growth. All right, so in case you missed this, make sure that you are participating in the Schoology discussion on big ideas in art, and be thinking about what kind of big ideas excite you and you're passionate about, because that is the kind of thing that you want to explore in your AP portfolio. Have a great day.